Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Testing Psychologist podcast, the podcast where we talk all about the business and practice of psychological and neuropsychological assessment. I'm your host, Dr. Jeremy Sharp, licensed psychologist, group practice owner, and private practice coach.
This episode is brought to you by PAR. PAR offers the RIAS-2 and RIST-2 remote to remotely assess or screen clients for intelligence, and they also offer in-person e-stimulus books for these two tests for in-person administration. Learn more at parinc.com.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Testing Psychologist podcast. I'm here with you today to talk all about the emotional needs of gifted kids. My guest, Adam Laningham, is the author of Gifted Children and How Trauma Impacts Them and Thinkology 2.0. He has over 20 years of experience in the field of education. Adam was recognized as the Arizona Gifted Teacher of the Year, has taught at several schools in multiple grade levels, created and facilitated numerous gifted programs, and served as a district gifted services manager, coordinating programs for over 6,000 gifted students. Adam has served on the board of directors for the Arizona Association for Gifted and Talented. He's currently the president-elect of SING, supporting the emotional needs of the gifted. He's a founding member of Callisto, supporting gifted foster youth, and an advisor for COGAT Riverside Insights. As founder and owner of Bright Child AZ, Arizona, Adam is an international speaker, consultant, and gifted advocate. So, as you might guess, Adam is quite the expert on gifted kids and their needs. So we talk about just definitions and types, so to speak, of gifted kids, ways to identify gifted kids, both via hard assessment and some of the soft signs that we might see. We talk about certainly the needs of gifted kids and classroom intervention, what that might look like. We talk about different types of gifted programs that are out there and why more homework is not the answer to challenging gifted kids, and many other things. So, as always, lots of information to take away from this one, and I can almost guarantee that Adam will be back for a second episode at some point because there's just so much to cover. But in the meantime, please enjoy this conversation and don't hesitate to check out the show notes where there are lots of resources, including the SING Summer Conference in July 2023 and Adam's books, the most recent of which is all about twice exceptionality. And these are fantastic resources for this topic. So let's get to my conversation with Adam Laningham. Adam, hey, welcome to the podcast.
Afternoon.
Yeah, good to see you. I'm excited to talk with you. This is one of those topics, I feel like I say this a lot, which is probably telling, but yeah, have not talked a whole lot about giftedness on the podcast. The only other episode I really did was way back within the first 20 episodes, so probably 6 years ago or something. So this is very much needed. I'm glad that you're here. Thanks for being here.
I'm excited to be here, so thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Yeah. Well, let's start with the usual question. Of all the things you could do in this world or in your life, why spend your time and energy on this particular area?
Well, it kind of goes back to, I feel like I'm a teacher at heart. No matter what I do, I'm always teaching and helping and supporting people. And they always say, when you get into teaching, you kind of find your niche. So within that, I taught at multiple grade levels, all kinds of different schools and things. And over time, I found, these gifted, creative, quirky learners. And I just kind of, gravitated to them. And that took me into gifted. And yeah, so they're definitely a misunderstood group that needs much more support than most people realize. So that's kind of what keeps me going, whether was teaching, a district administrator, or now doing lots of different things outside of the school system. So,
Yeah. Just recognizing maybe an underserved group, if you would phrase it that way, and knowing that they have needs unique from other students, huh?
yes, very, very much misunderstood for the most part. So that falls
Sure.
into my education and advocacy piece. So
Yeah, I'm with you. It makes me think back to the first episode I did with Dr. Amy Yermish on assessing gifted kids. She framed it as giftedness as an area of competence in our field, almost like well, not almost, very literally, like a population that we need to be pretty educated on and understand how they need support differently than some other folks that we might work with.
absolutely. And there's so many preconceived notions once you say the term gifted, which is one of the things I talk about. Actually, the first book I did was don't use the G word with these kids because the adults don't even understand, and have all kinds of conceptions and understandings of what giftedness is and is not. So we kind of put that label on these kids. Well, that doesn't always help them try
Mm-hmm.
to find their way through and understand what's going on.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I think that rolls really nicely into just some introductory information, some background info. I would love to hear your working definition of giftedness and the different variations, if there are different variations. Like, how do you even conceptualize giftedness?
It, it's definitely interesting as I go around and talk to people around the country and, talk to them about giftedness. It's kind of even broadened what I think of it because, you come down to just the logistics of it in a school system. Every state is so different in what they classify what giftedness is and how you're able to service them. And so, I get questions like, well, what's the percentage of the population? And I mean, it's even that's all over because the experts in the field can't even come up with I would say, a definition we all agree to, as far as giftedness. But to me, it's definitely the ability to, in one area or another, go beyond what your typical peers can do. And again, coming out of education, we always focus on academics, but I would argue that's in anything that can be leadership, sports, whatever, arts. I mean, some people, for whatever reason, just naturally have that ability to take it to the next level or understand it in a different way. That stands out. They're outliers.
That's reasonable. That's reasonable. Yeah, I think we get locked into looking at it specifically through cognitive ability, being neuropsychologists or school psychologists. They're looking at it through that assessment frame. It's, does this kid have an IQ or a specific cognitive skill above the 95th percentile, right? Whatever it may be in your state. It's easy to get kind of locked into that, but it sounds like you look at it in a broader sense where this could be IQ, could be cognitive, could be creativity, could be sports, could be, I don't know, leadership, could be any number of things.
It truly can. And I mean, again, we're dealing with people. So everybody's a little different and how they apply themselves and what they're able to do. So we like to come up with titles and names and put people into boxes and things. And even when you say gifted, even trying to explain gifted, we're trying to put them into a box. We have some general ideas or ideas of what constitutes giftedness. But again, people are complicated. It's a little gray.
It's so true. Yeah, we love boxes. We love boxes. So let me back up even more. Do you, so we've been using the term gifted. You're you're head of this agency, supporting the emotional needs of the gifted. Is gifted the right term? Should we be using something different?
I don't know. We need something logistically, and again, kind of going back to schools. If funding is involved, you need a label, unfortunately. So it's this double-edged sword. It's a term. We can come up with another term. It's still going to be, what do we agree? And we have to have it in order to in many states get funding, or in the district I worked for, it all came down to staffing of teachers. How many kids qualify told me the ratio I was allowed to staff these programs at. So we do need a term, even though I don't necessarily like it. I mean, the ideal world, it's just we would accept everybody's a little different and differentiate for them, whatever it is, and we don't need labels. But with the systems that we're in and what we need to do, we need them.
Sure, sure. Always. The thing for me with gifted is it sort of automatically sets up a dichotomy of the other side of the coin is not gifted, and that doesn't feel great for other students. But I also, it's like you said, we need something, and that's been the word for, I mean, since I was in elementary school, at least.
Yeah, and I think the word does lead into those misconceptions because it's many, I don't think, voice it this way, but feel like it's a bit elitist. It's like, oh, these kids get this kind of treatment for whatever, whatever on a test. And I think that does feed into, well, budget cuts and what's going on. They'll be fine. I've heard that, I don't know how many times. The gifted kids are fine. They could just sit there. And it's like, no, that's the worst you can do, is have a kid come to school and realize they're not going to have their needs met. They're not as important because they already know it.
Mm-hmm.
And I talk a lot about that in my presentations and things. It's what got me into gifted really was I naturally started, finding my niche and liking these creative, quirky kids. But it was these students who were never identified at the elementary level coming up to me as a middle school teacher, and super smart. They got my sarcasm, my dark English humor. They got it. They wouldn't do homework, and they were awful for some of the other teachers. But I'm like, these kids are smart. What's going on? And they weren't coming out of the gifted program. And that's what it comes down to, making sure we can identify these kids, how important that is, and then getting them into services that nurture those gifts and give them that place to perform and show their strengths.
Yeah. I think there's a lot to unpack there. I definitely want to talk about how to support them. I'm curious about this identification component, though. So you just in that and touched on a few soft signs of giftedness, right? Understands dark English humor. Check. I'm kidding, but I am curious how you look at the assessment or identification process for gifted kids, and what you consider sort of like must-haves on the hard assessment side, so to speak, and then some of those other I guess you would say soft signs that teachers or parents might notice that don't fall under a maybe typical assessment.
Absolutely. Well, and again, I come at it a more holistic view, like as a educator who's been experienced and knows, I know a gifted kid when I come across them. I don't need a test. But for many, we do. And again, I'm an advisor for Cogat Riverside, so I will give you that disclaimer. But I do bring that whole holistic kind of, bent to it, because yes, we do need these kind of hard tests. Many states require them. You have to go through them, and gathering data on kids is good. Not that we need to test them every day and do all, some of the crazy standardized testing and stuff that goes on in many places, but getting data on how your students or children learn, how they can process things, that's not a bad thing. That is definitely good. That's important. As a district manager, I was in charge of all of the testing, and we used the COGAT, and I was the first to tell my teachers, we do the best we can. We assess these kids, but it's one test on one day. If the kid was having a bad day, the kid didn't realize it was important, whatever, there's lots of factors. So it was always, yes, we have to jump through these hoops. This is part of the process. We have to do it. But we also need to understand they're kids, and we need to look for other things. So a lot of the things
I like that.
for especially trying to identify underserved populations was students who have been assessed for special needs, lots of times the testing that the psychologist can do can help the gifted end look through and see how are those kids functioning? Are they thinking differently? What areas? A lot of the assessments I noticed working with psychologists were much more in depth than what we were doing on the gifted kind of screening end. So I loved looking at those assessments and talking to them and seeing what we can do.
Mm.
We also we look for those kind of kids, and those kids would be considered twice exceptional if they do qualify for a service for a special need and gifted. And we can talk about that in a bit. But also, we would look at kids, for instance, who are English language learners. If they are able to move quickly and test out of the ESL tests, that's showing something. So working with my teachers, we're always looking for kids, casting that wide net. Okay, those kids who may be struggling in one area, but are definitely bright in another. Those going through EL tests, and you talk to the EL teachers, are like, "Oh my gosh, this kid tested out within a few months." I'm like, "There's probably something there." So again, we always wanted to look at multiple data points, even if the kiddo wouldn't count specifically for our numbers and our staffing. We always wanted to take those kids that we were seeing that potential in. And what's interesting, when we started setting up kindergarten and preschool programs, we would take those kids who we just had a checklist for behaviors. We would take the kids who just got really close on those tests, get them in with a gifted trained teacher in that nurturing and enriching environment. They typically tested later and got into the programs.
I mean, that really speaks to it's the opposite of stereotype threat. I can't think of the term now, but it's, kids sort of like live up to what you give them, right?
There is a lot of that. Now, I can't take just any kid and put them with a gifted teacher and make them gifted, but sure, there are a lot, it's a whole range of abilities and areas and things, and a good enriching environment makes a huge difference.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. I'm glad you brought that up. I know that our district uses I think it's a 4-point matrix for identification just based on assessment, right? So there's the COGAT, and then there are 3 other data points, district testing, STAR, MAPS, maybe one other one. And they have to hit all of those points to be identified as gifted. They have to fall above the threshold on each of those components.
Okay.
Which is interesting. Your face. I wish the audience could see your face. Right. Tell me what you're thinking right now.
Not to react to that too much.
Yeah, let's go there. What are you thinking?
Well, gifted is. We did not use academic tests to identify gifted.
Oh, okay.
That's learned. We want reasoning ability, processing, thinking. That's why the COGAT was usually, if it's going to be one thing for us, it was the COGAT, the be all and end all if they pass that. You have gifted kids who don't care about school, even at younger ages. They're not going to get good grades, and they're not going to do well on those academic tests. I mean, they might if they felt like it that day, maybe. But academics, that's, training kids for honors and AP courses. That's a different thing. And I mean, we can get into that if you want. But gifted is, I don't know. Usually kids who do well academically do well in school, as in they've learned the game, they will do the homework, they will do the work, they will do well. Gifted kids think differently. So they can take things apart. They can process things faster. They may be doing well in school. They may not. That doesn't mean they don't have that gifted potential there to do that if they were put in the right situation or had the right motivation. So I was always of the mind, and I still am, that academics is different.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
It's what you've learned. It's how you apply yourself. Whereas gifted is, how do you piece things together? How do you reason through things? How do you process that?
Yeah, I can get on board with that. Yeah. Yeah. I don't know. Well, it sounds like it absolutely varies district by district and state by state.
Even school to school. I mean, it's
school to school.
Some of these states, it's like you can go to one school and go to the next school 2 miles down the road, and it's a different world.
Yeah, that makes sense. We've seen that in other situations within our district, certainly, and guidelines are different. Yeah. which makes it super easy to navigate for parents and
Oh,
families. Yeah. Yeah. Well, let's see. I would love to talk about, you mentioned just briefly some maybe misconceptions about gifted kids. And I wonder if there's more to talk about there. Could we dive into that for a bit?
sure. Well, I mean, a lot. I mean, it kind of goes back to the label gifted. What does it mean? And a lot of people who haven't been experienced or know, it's just, oh, those kids who, do well in school. Well, not necessarily. Or, you're gifted. That means you should get straight A's. Things should be easy. Not necessarily, because as we work with gifted kids, maybe you're just gifted in math and okay in everything else. Just because you're gifted in math does not mean you need to be in, the expectations are to write these great novels and do all of this amazing poetry and read 4 grade levels ahead. No. So again, coming into what giftedness is, there's so many misconceptions, and one is you're gifted in everything, and that's a lot of the pressure we put on our kids,
Mm-hmm.
that now they're to perform. Now they're supposed to get straight A's because they're gifted. Even the parents, oh, my kid's gifted now, how can they get a C in algebra? Well, maybe they're just non-verbally gifted. you know
Mm-hmm.
so there's a lot of the preconception, or those preconceived notions of what giftedness is and what it is, a
Mm-hmm.
lot tied to academics.
Yeah.
um, but also I would say a lot to losing my train of thought. um,
That happens
just
to me all the
how, yeah, how they apply themselves and things like that. And I would always argue that every child comes to school each day to learn. They should get a full day of learning. So regardless of where they're at in their abilities, if they're already 3 grade levels ahead in math, that doesn't mean they don't have to do math today. It means they need to be up at that level that they're working at. So many times, at least when I became a manager and started going out to the different schools and really seeing what's going on, I'm like, time on task, these kids can do it. The schedule is this way. No, you don't have 20 minutes of dead time. What can this child be doing? And they deserve to learn. They don't need to be the tutor in the class to help the rest of the kids because they got their work done early. I mean, and if most gifted kids, they're not the best tutors in the world because it comes easier to them trying to explain a concept, especially math, that they may just know, to someone who's struggling. Not a good situation. Or kids who, when they're done with their work, they just go read. Okay, gifted kids who enjoy reading are voracious readers and will read no matter what. So they're in school. They need to be engaged in some enriching concepts, going more in depth, going further ahead. They deserve a full day of learning. And I think a lot of the preconceived notions is they're fine, they're good. Well, a lot of that shows that, they're not as valued as the other kids. And it causes issues, I would say. And that's a lot of where my focus is now, is that whole social and emotional piece, is because we have all of these conceptions and things placed on them and what they should be or how it fits, but it's not really the case. And one thing I will say, as I travel around and talk to different groups and things, I always get the question, well, again, asking me to put gifted kids in the box. How are they all the same?
Mm-hmm.
And it's like, well, like we said earlier, my definition of being able to go beyond their peers in a particular area, but also they are far more sensitive than their typical peers. I have not come across a gifted kid who is not more sensitive to what's going on, because again, they can process, they are sensitive because of the system they're in and what they have to do. I've not come across a gifted kid that was not more sensitive. They may not vocalize it to you, but they are taking things in, especially when they're young. Like you get these, I always hear these stories like, this child knows how to do math, but they can't explain how to do it. Well, they soaked it up somewhere, especially young gifted kids. They're like a sponge. They are soaking up knowledge. They are aware of what's going on, even when you don't think they are, and they take all of that in. So, I
Right.
guess, yeah.
I want to touch on the idea of, or the concept, phenomenon. I'm not sure what you call it. Theory of Dabrowski's overexcitabilities. You mentioned sensitivity. I'm just curious from your perspective, how do you approach that theory? I'll settle on that.
And like everything, I agree with some and not all of everything. Because, and again, part of it is the kids you're working with.
Yeah.
Um, yes, they are sensitive, and they can be sensitive to things that you're not even aware of, and they can be reacting to things, and even they haven't fully processed, like the tag in the back of their shirt is irritating their skin and they're sensitive, but they don't know why and they're reacting. So it's a lot of the times is getting to know the individual child, knowing that they're going to be sensitive to certain things, colors, smells, different things. They may not be aware of it. And again, that's part of working with these kids and not just focusing on the academics, but being aware of their thinking, being aware of their surroundings, thinking about it, talking about it, learning how to, work in the real world, work with others. Lots of things come out about like the fluorescent lights in the classrooms. Like some of these
Yeah.
kids are so sensitive, they can hear the buzz from the lights. Nobody else does, and you think the kid's just misbehaving or reacting. Um, so there,
Sure.
yeah, there's a lot of things where it's seen as fluff. The kids don't need it, but the gifted kids do need it. And
Hmm.
academically, if they get these pieces right, if they're able to organize their thoughts, if they're able to focus and look past these things, learn to work with somebody else in a group and use those kind of skills, all these kind of soft skill pieces, the academics, especially for these kids, that's the easy part. They will excel. But so many parents and teachers, again, we're focusing on the academic piece and jumping over all of these more nebulous gray things that are harder to teach. People may look down on your wasting time in the classroom building those relationships in that environment, um, but that has to come first. If you,
Right.
especially with the gifted kids, it doesn't hurt the rest of the kids. There are many sensitive kids out there that need those kinds of things, but for the gifted kids, it's really essential.
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah, it's an interesting perspective that I could really get on board with that. It's like the academic part is the easy part, so to speak. Theoretically, gifted kids, we're generalizing. And, a lot of gifted kids can pick up academic stuff pretty quickly. It's more all the other stuff that happens at school, managing emotions, environment, method, maybe of teaching, relationships, things like that. And taking care of all those pieces is maybe more important than the actual teaching or the material. I don't know. Maybe that's a stretch.
Well, no, I mean, and I would argue, I mean, I started out many years ago teaching, and I was probably more traditional in my scope. And I'm like, I'm not spending 2 weeks on icebreakers and things at the beginning of the year and the kumbaya nonsense. But I was able to connect well with the kids. I think a lot of it just naturally. So, we would do the hands on activities and things like that. And the kids knew their boundaries and where to go. So I didn't spend a lot of time on that. But looking back, it's like most of the time we really do. Not that it needs to be hand holding and kumbaya for a month out of the school year to do this. You can really get to know your students and do a lot of things through group work and writing activities and getting to know them while you're teaching them. But for gifted children, they need that relationship. So the teacher does need to really think about that environment, how they are going to get to know their kids better, show the kids who they are a little bit more, because the gifted kids they are sensitive to those kinds of things, and be really specific in that as you're starting out the school year to build that kind of environment that they're going to do well. And it's good for all the other kiddos in the room, by the way. A lot of gifted strategies and things that we do, it's good for everyone, but for the gifted, it's essential.
Hmm.
And again, putting in time to get past all of that, they will be good. I had, I don't know, one of my stories, but when I became the manager of the school district, I went in to do some trainings and meetings with one of my magnet schools where we had the highly gifted program, or one of them. And I was talking to the teachers, and again, I'm in Arizona, so if it's not tested, it wasn't learned. Um, but the big state test was coming up, and the teachers were, on edge about it. I'm like, what are you talking about? And they're like, well, we have to start, doing test prep and planning. I'm like, I thought they were teasing me. I thought they were trying to pull my leg at first. I'm like, we're in the highly gifted academy. The kids are 2 grade levels above. But they're like, well, they're tested at their current, the age level, grade level curriculum. So they haven't had it in a year or two. I'm like, this is the Arizona test, which, let's be honest, has been watered down I don't know how many times. These are highly gifted kids. We're not shutting down our project-based program for a month to do test prep.
All right.
Furious.
Yeah. Yeah.
Furious. Had to get the principal involved. I'm like, I am not budging on this. If you guys are nurturing these kids and doing these great things, they don't need to be spending all of this time on reviewing old academics. We can review a few days before so the kids are used to the test and what it's going to be asked for, because the kids would be worried, those conscientious, gifted kids, and want to do well. Some know the game and don't care. But I'm like, we can do that kind of thing to relieve some anxiety. But my goodness, these are gifted kids. They have the scores to prove it. They have a completed application. They've been in the program. They're doing well. Let's step back and think. If we're doing all these other things in the classroom to make sure they're feeling valued, that they're getting what they need, they have their creative needs met, we have the data to show they're working well above grade level, why are we worrying about these things?
Great question.
Academics. Sure. Not that academics aren't important, but
it is challenging when it's wrapped up in funding, bureaucracy, political stuff. There's a lot of layers here. But yes. Yes. Well, we're touching on this idea a little bit, but I wonder if we could sharpen the focus just on, I would love to hear from your experience or what the research says about commonalities among gifted kids. I mean, are there certain quote unquote personality traits or other qualities that are more common across gifted kids that we should be aware of?
I would say yes and no. I mean, there are certain, traits that we would look for, and I would share with my teachers when we're looking at identifying kids. Again, budget was a big issue, so every kid was not going to get it tested by a psychologist for gifted. So we did more of the screener COGAT type testing, but even then we couldn't test every kid because it's all funding. Mm-hmm. So I would really work with the teachers and give them checklists and things. These are some things to look that gifted kids tend to have. They think outside the box. Sometimes they have a high vocabulary for their age, especially if they're, verbally gifted. Sometimes they surprise you and just know things. So we would go through checklists and things to help, but even with that, kids would surprise us. And I'd be like, if in doubt, throw the kid in. We'll deal with the money later. Get the kids tested. If you have any inkling as a teacher that, again, we can train to look for things, and we're putting kids in a box. I will say yes, for sure, they are sensitive. Yes, they do think outside of the box, but you're not always able to see that. So when we're looking at testing or identifying kids, that's where I'm like, we need to look at the whole picture, look at all kinds of things. And for me, philosophically, when we're looking at programs, I'm like, if you think the kid will benefit from it and you have room, throw them in. Not everybody like that, but it may surprise you. We're still learning so many things about the brain and how it functions and kids, how they develop. I mean, I used to, we call it looping, where you'd stay with your kids for 2 to 3 years in a row.
Yeah.
they would come back at the end of summer like a different kid sometimes, just within a few months, their development and their maturity and things. And so it's really hard to pigeonhole these kids and say they're constantly evolving, changing, growing. To try to fit them into a box is really hard. But yes, they can be very quirky. They are more sensitive. Trying to think. It's hard because every one I want to say, I can think of a gifted kid I knew that was an exception to whatever that was.
Right. People are complicated.
Absolutely. And another thing, so we had our highly gifted academies, and to get into those, it was academics as well as giftedness, teacher approvals, parents signing off. So this is a big, long process. Yes, I had to go through all the applications. But when you got into the classrooms, I would take parents on tours. And then if I was in the area, I would just drop in just to see what's going on. But I remember my first tour that I took, it was a third grade class, and I took some parents in. It was, I don't know, beginning of the school year. And I walked in, and of course, it's like noise and busyness and all kinds of things. I'm like, okay, good. They're engaged. I'm looking around, and they are. At first, I was kind of like, okay, but calm face, we're good. This is an official tour. And of course, the kids are working, and the more you see it, the more engaged they were. They had their laptops out. They're working on different things. The teacher had a small group working on a totally different activity. And of course, so the parents are looking and whatever. And of course, I see this kid over under the table. And I'm like, all right, I'm going to go see what's going on. So I walk over there and kneel down, and he has his Chromebook laptop, whatever it was. I'm like, okay, what are you doing? And he's like, oh, I'm working on my PowerPoint. And he turns and shows me. I'm like, oh, that's cool. And I said, well, what's this? And he's like, well, that's so-and-so. He's in 5th grade. I'm like, you're working with a 5th grader on your project? He's like, yeah, we're using Google whatever back and forth. I'm like, oh, parents, come look.
Right.
Like, how cool is that? That, within this classroom of, screened, highly gifted, whatever, the kids were all doing different things at different levels, different abilities. Even within that program, I would tell people, you walk into the classroom and they're all gifted. There's even other things that screen them in to get in there. But you've got the future CEO probably dotting her I's, crossing her T's. Everything's immaculate and perfect in her binder. And then the boy on the floor rolling around with the Chromebook. But oh my gosh, the cool things he comes up with for his projects. He may or may not be able to find his homework, but the stuff he can come up with. And that's gifted at the same grade level, at the same school, going through even more, what do I want to say, like hoops to jump through to get into this program. And it's a whole bell curve, I call it, of giftedness. Those high achieving, super on top of it, and then kind of the quirky Einstein-y kids. It's you can't put them in a box.
Yeah, it's so as we talk, it just gets more and more obvious that we need to keep in mind the variability and not try to build a specific template necessarily for gifted kids.
And in many places a longer time ago, it was more that academic route. It was, we set up honors and AP courses because they would get more and they would just jump through more hoops and do more things. And it's like, well, no, we're not school gifted.
Yeah. I wanted to ask about that. And since we're opening that box, or that door, let's go ahead and walk through it, I suppose. The intervention for gifted kids, or the support for gifted kids. I talk a lot with parents about not just pursuing gifted programs that give more homework, right? Like that's not necessarily the best fit for your highly intelligent kid. Maybe for some, but not for all. And we do have a number of gifted programs in our district. That gifted GT just means you get more homework, right? And I wonder what you think about all that. And there's a lot to unpack from that question, so feel free to tackle it however you'd like.
Let's take a break to hear from our featured partner. The RIAS-2 and RIST-2 are trusted gold standard tests of intelligence. For clinicians using teleassessment, PAR offers the RIAS-2 Remote, which allows you to remotely assess clients, and the RIST-2 Remote, which lets you screen clients remotely for general intelligence. For those practicing in the office, PAR has in-person e-stimulus books for both the RIAS-2 and the RIST-2. These are electronic versions of the original paper stimulus books that are an equivalent, convenient, and more hygienic alternative when administering these tests in person. Learn more at parinc.com/RIAS2_remote. All right, let's get back to the podcast.
I see it as we have high achieving students. They're the ones who do school well. They follow directions, they're organized. Generally, they have very involved parents, make sure they get their homework done. They're able to move a little faster, do more work, go into honors AP programs. Great. That's not necessarily gifted. Within gifted, I would say we have two tracks. We have the quirky gifted who think outside the box, super creative, maybe more artistic, maybe more gifted in other areas, but they, even if they can, are not motivated to necessarily move into more work and move further ahead and jump through more hoops and have that kind of discipline to apply themselves as the high achieving kids do. Within gifted, we do have the high achieving gifted. So kind of in that highly gifted program, I had the future CEOs and the quirky people creating the new vaccine for whatever, So within gifted, we have kind of two tracks where, yes, an honors AP is great for them. They will excel. They will apply themselves. That's a perfect fit. What I was noticing in our district, and we were preschool through 12th grade, we had nothing besides that highly academic, rigorous giftedness after some areas after 6th grade even, but certainly starting at 9th grade, it was just honors AP and that's it. And many gifted kids would drop out of those programs. And knowing what I know about that social emotional piece and all these different things where they need to feel valued and have that kind of say and use their creativity, I started pushing the high schools to start doing more as far as like what I would call truly gifted. And truly gifted programs would be more project hands-on learning. Students get more say in the content or how they are applying the content. There's more time to go in depth and do those kind of enriching activities versus drill and kill and take a test.
Sure.
Talking with a lot of families and kids, because this was a process. We were a big system. It wasn't just like, oh, Adam snapped his fingers and now we've got real gifted programming at the high school. It was a process. But I started doing parent nights and meeting with students. And let's just say most of our high schools were just like when I was in high school. So not very open-minded to something new. I went around and had parent camps and things at every high school, talked to the parents, talked to the kids. And one story really stood out to me. This boy who was at our highest performing top tier high school. And he was telling me he saw the flyers and came to the meeting. And he said, I was in the gifted courses as a kid in the elementary school. And I came up here and all it is AP. And he's like, I don't care about that test. I don't want to do 3 hours of homework. I don't want to do it. And he says, I failed out of, was it world history or something? So I had to retake it. And it was AP world history or I don't know, something. And he said, I went into the normal class. And he said, I just sat around and talked to the teacher. It was so easy. At that school, and I know this is happening other places, and as I've traveled, the AP and honors, advanced courses ended up for all of the kids who will do more. And then what was left were the kids who weren't motivated to do it. But when you had these gifted kids who had that potential but didn't see the need of the drive, there was nothing for them. He says it went from one extreme to the other. And looking at statistics and things, we're starting to find out more and more that gifted kids are struggling. They're dropping out of high school. Many studies are starting to show they're more likely to commit self-harm, um, even
Yeah.
worse kinds of things.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So it doesn't necessarily surprise me if these kids are sensitive, they are creative, they are quirky, and we're not giving them an outlet to apply themselves and enjoy learning. I mean, for goodness sake, we can't enjoy what we're learning. We just have to go through these checklists. Yeah, it's not fun. And what's in it for them? So what I would say gifted is, yes, you can have, I'm not bashing AP honors. Those are amazing programs. They're great for a lot of kids. They're great for a lot of gifted kids. They're not great for every gifted kid.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so before I left, we really pushed to every high school having at least some form of some creative outlet with gifted trained teachers that allowed the kids to do different things. And actually, that school ended up doing the most. We had the most gifted options and courses and different AP gifted, Gen Ed gifted, weird courses for all different subject areas because the teachers bought into it and really started seeing the value of, yes, I'll take on an extra prep and tweak this class for these kinds of learners. It was actually pretty cool.
That does
So,
sound fantastic. Yeah. I would love to talk a little bit more about this subset of gifted kids who maybe don't fit in the academic box, who aren't high achievement motivated necessarily. Yeah. What are some of the cool ways that you've seen or implemented to reach those kids and give them opportunities in the classroom or on a bigger, broader scale within the school to really thrive?
yeah, well, a lot of times we did. I know, and they're called different things, but especially at the younger age levels, we had like RTI, MTSS, weird like
Uh-huh.
flex times built in.
Yeah.
And that was where a lot of my gifted teachers and specialists focused on building their schedules so the gifted kids could come during that flexible time and they could focus on hands-on learning kind of things like STEM projects or arts or theater, because a lot of our schools were lacking in a lot of those things, as well as tying in a lot of that social and emotional kind of piece that the classroom teachers didn't have time for, or the groups were too big. A lot of the teachers who did this were at our Title I schools, where there was a lot of they need that academic content. Even the gifted kids at those low socioeconomic schools needed that content, but they had that flex time to now have that creative spark during the day for those to have that. I would almost call it a break, something fun, but you're still learning
Mm-hmm.
and engaged in doing what kind of you need in a smaller group. One thing that was really interesting, and I actually do presentations on this, is the CTE courses, career and technical education,
Tell me
or
about
at the
that.
high school level.
Mm-hmm.
Way back, when I was in school, that was a track for the kids who don't go to college.
Yeah.
Learn a trade. Oh, those are great for gifted kids because the career and technical education, those classes are hands-on. They're actually doing something. It's real life, so they can see meaning in it. And the kids can naturally kind of create a project, a business plan. One of our schools had the culinary arts. They could learn how to be a chef and do things or run a restaurant, or the gifted kids could find the meaning in it and actually apply themselves besides just sitting there and doing, bookwork and things like that. So career and technical for gifted is wonderful.
Such a cool perspective. Yeah, I never really thought of it that way, but the way you describe it, I could see that being really, really powerful for gifted kids because those classes really are the precursors for engineering, entrepreneurship, finance, financial management. If depending how you look at them, right? I mean, those applied experiences could really be a catalyst for gifted kids to go in incredible directions.
Absolutely, especially nowadays where, there's so much opportunity and freedom to start your own business or do things for these gifted kids, a lot who drop out or barely get through school. They're not going to college, but they're smart. What are they going to do? They're going to start a business or do something like that. And these skills definitely help. And it gives them kind of that meaning even if they are going to college. It was fun talking to the parents about this because they're like, whoa, what do you mean? I'm like, think about it. What does your kid like to do? these are good classes. It doesn't mean drop out of the AP classes, but have some classes built into their high school schedule where it's creative, it's different, outside the box, or CT.
Yeah, I love that. I love that. And we didn't have this when I was in high school, but I would imagine these days there are more applied, like software engineering classes or coding, and stuff like that that could be really fun for kids. And
Well, that's all creative. And the kids,
Mhm.
especially coding and things, they know how to code better than we do. They're on the computers learning it and figuring it out. Gifted kids can problem solve. So
Right.
and they're creative. So that's a great fit for most of them.
Yeah. 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 I'm going to be thinking about that. So
And,
let's
and it is good for all of the kids. So
Right. Well, that's the cool thing about those classes is it seems like they're pretty applicable across the spectrum of motivation, ability, achievement, etc. Like hands-on classes have a lot of value that I think we've probably undervalued in our educational system for a long time, especially given all these stats. Anyway, we could go down the rabbit hole of college and student debt. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Um, we've landed on this topic a little bit throughout the interview, but I would love to spend more focused time on just this idea of catching gifted kids who might fall through the cracks, kids who are maybe in districts that don't have a lot of resources. I think there's maybe some overlap there with, if you might say, like culturally responsive gifted support, and Twice Exceptional is kind of in there as well. So I would love to talk more about those kids that are maybe getting missed or under supported a little bit.
Yeah, there's a lot who go under identified, I would say, for various reasons. And that's why a lot of the statistics we're starting to see with kids dropping out of school, doing self-harm, those kinds of things. I know so many gifted kids are not identified. So those numbers are worse than what's being reported. But again, it kind of comes to that mindset shift of what is gifted, what can we do? That I would say one of the easiest things is in the classrooms is we need to be doing more projects, more activities where the kids are given a bit more freedom and you can kind of see what they're able to do. A gifted kid will run with it and start piecing things together, generally beyond what their gen ed peers would do. And just seeing those kinds of things could definitely help teachers identify them and give them more. I do think a lot of it comes down to the teachers, well, especially now there's so much turnover and craziness going on, is the teachers are overwhelmed. We have these huge class sizes and they're given the curriculum and all of these extra things that they teach to the middle and then help those that need it most. That's what happens. I mean, as a former teacher, I will tell you, yeah, that happens. It's still happening. It's all the time. Teaching's hard. So over time, teachers generally get better and you start learning these skills and how can I loosen up and, not, make sure every standard is this big thing. We can't get through all the standards anyway. Let's pick and choose what's most important. Think about the kids as kids, not a product, and get to know them a bit better and start allowing them some freedom to see what they can do. But we come across a lot of, how shall we say, barriers to giftedness, one being that social and emotional. I mean, I had principals point blank tell me, this is a Title I school. We don't have any gifted kids.
Ooh.
Oh, yes.
It's a bold statement.
Clear as day. It was all I could do not to jump over my desk. And said multiple times. But in that case, I did work with the gifted the teachers and proved her wrong by identifying more kids at her campus.
Nice.
But no, so there are a lot of preconceived notions and what I want to say stereotypes out there.
Mm-hmm.
So there should be the same percentage of the population at a Title I school should be gifted as a higher end school. I will say, number wise, usually the more involved parents, more affluence, we find more of those kids. for sure.
Hmm.
But still, depending on how we're using our identification techniques, should be able to find them in the Title I areas. One of the things we did was there's a nicer way of putting it, but we would lower the bar at our Title I schools because we use the COGAT. And I'll tell you, if you get a kid who is in Title I area, very impoverished, and they can get an 89 on the COGAT, they're in. That's just what I would say. I don't care what you market, whatever. We're getting those kids in. We're seeing that potential. So there are a lot of barriers out there, whether it's a socioeconomic, um, race, I think plays a factor a lot of the time when you think stereotypically. When I first started teaching, the kids in the gifted program all kind of looked the same. They had very involved parents. They looked the same. They all were wonderfully well behaved. It was very different. We were missing a lot of kids. Um, so the ESL, I kind of talked a little bit about that. Just because kids come from another country or don't speak English doesn't mean they're not gifted. It's just giving them being open, giving them those supports, and maybe using multiple data points to try to get them services. But it's that whole mindset shift of really understanding what giftedness is and being open to it. I will say sometimes I've run into teachers who are almost afraid.
Hmm. How so?
The kids might know more than them.
Hmm.
And I've run into that myself, but I'm good with it. But definitely like the pre-testing and testing and those kinds of things, like the teachers, it's like, okay, now I know this kid is labeled or knows this already. Now what do I do? It's another whole thing to deal with. But and a lot of teachers are intimidated. I remember I had a fifth grade student. So my minor is in history. I took a ton of history courses, especially American Civil War. I know a lot. And this kid, fifth grader, he was teaching me stuff.
That's
The Civil
awesome.
War. I'm like, where is this coming from? Well, he was fixated on it. He wanted to learn about it. There's this thing called the internet. He was able to go on and find a lot of details and information and come in, and we would have these great discussions, and he would teach me things. It didn't intimidate me. I found it quite amusing. So it's,
Good for you.
yeah, but it's kind of understanding these kids and realizing they can look like anything, they can come from anywhere, but they stand out in these areas. And how do we nurture that?
Yeah. 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 It sounds like a theme with the maybe under identified kids is, I mean, even if the school doesn't have the resources to, well, to provide a ton of support, you can still be on the lookout for kids who are standing out among their peers, nurture that, support them, give them a little extra opportunity to engage in problem solving, thinking outside the box.
Absolutely. Well, and another thing is the twice exceptional. So you've got,
Yes.
uh, and that's actually my book is now on Amazon, but this
Oh,
book is twice exceptionalism. But what's interesting about those kids is a lot of people see it, we're good in the school system at finding kids who struggle and working on that deficit to support them.
mm-hmm.
Gifted kids can have a deficit. They can struggle in multiple areas. And a lot of times that focus is on filling the deficit, and they don't even notice the gifts or those other areas of talent that these kids don't have. And when I was the manager, I worked closely with the student support special ed services. And I'm like, okay, where anytime you have any inkling of a kid who shows giftedness in one of these other areas, we need to know. We need to make sure that that piece that maybe keeps them wanting to come to school, that piece of joy during the day that they're good at, we nurture it and we get it. So we would, a lot of our programs, giftedness came first. And this was a big mind shift is if a kid has any kind of gift or anything, that's burned into the schedule. We're making sure those kids have something. And then the special ed student support services wrapped around and tried to support them in those other areas. And that was really a priority and it worked really well. Again, you have to have open-minded people that you're working with, but We can't have these kids going through school that all they're, done to is support this one area that they're struggling in, which means they probably don't enjoy it. And that's all they've got.
Right, right. So would you say, or is this a stretch, an overgeneralization to say that for twice exceptional kids, we should prioritize supporting the giftedness before the...
Yes, flat out, yes. We need to lead with their strengths.
I
And
like
that's what
that.
we talk about, my co-authors and I. The kids need to have that kind of spark. They need to have that bit of joy, something that stands out in their day that they can kind of, the old saying, hang your hat on. Like they're good at math, then let them excel in math and do what they need to do. And we'll get them caught up on the rest, but let them have that peace. Because I mean, if we think about, I always like to put myself in someone else's shoes. If I'm going to school and all I get, you know, taught at is stuff I don't do well in, I'm not enjoying, and I'm really good at this other thing, but I never get it day after day, year after year, what is that going to do? You're not going to do well in school, period.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
I say that to parents a lot. It's not 100% applicable to the situation, but the idea I think fits that. Just imagine as an adult, if we had to do something 8 hours a day for 12 years that we didn't feel good at,
Yeah.
that is insanity making. It's truly torturous. And that's kind of what we ask our kids to do in many cases.
Exactly what we do. Yes. And
Yeah.
they need extra help. So we'll pull them out of PE. They need extra help. Let's pull them out of recess. Oh my God, no. It doesn't mean that those things aren't important, that they do need to be able to read at grade level. I'm not saying they don't, but we have to balance it and see both sides of every child, let alone these gifted learners, because twice exceptional is especially the subset of the subset, and schools aren't built for that.
I
For
think you're
these
right.
have, both ends, that's hard. And as a classroom teacher with 30 kids, and you've got a kiddo or two like that, you need help. That's going to be difficult.
Right. Right. There's a lot to say about this, and I know we just don't have the time, at least this time, to dive super deep. But I would love for you to tell us a little bit more about this most recent book, because we do dwell, my audience, right? My people, we dwell in this world of twice exceptional kids, probably more than any other, because we do so much assessment and see, kids who are both struggling and excelling in different ways. And so curious about this book on twice exceptionality.
Yeah, so my co-authors and I, Dr. Lynn Lim is a professor out at Bridges. She is president of SING, which is how I got to know her, because I am president-elect of SING. And then our other author, Val Wilson, is one of my former teachers who I worked with for many, many years, and is just an amazing professional helping and working with her kids at a low socioeconomic school. So we collaborated, and it's actually turned into a series. I had this book started a couple years ago during the pandemic, and it's now turning into probably 5 books, probably. Um, yes, like this. We can go on and on and on. But kind of taking all of our experience. So Lynn is the professor at Bridges, which focuses on twice exceptionalism. Her son is twice exceptional. Then me overseeing and managing gifted and working with that social emotional piece. And then Val with the Title I piece. So the series is Gifted and Struggling Twice Exceptional Children. And the first book, we decided to focus on the parents. So it's what our parents need to know. Next month, we should have the teacher version out. And they're all set up like book study books, so you can do it in book studies and things. But and then what's the next one? We're going to do strategies in the classroom, so things teachers can use in the classroom to help this population. Administrators, we have a guide coming out, and then we're going to do one on mental health professionals to help support them, because in my experience, a lot of school counselors and things really don't get gifted, let alone twice exceptional. So we're wanting to create a series that are easy to read resources with strategies and things that will help adults work with these kiddos.
Sounds great. That's such needed resources for all those populations.
Absolutely. And again, we talk about leading with kids' strengths. So one of the main concepts is we view gifted kids as green. We're based a lot of it off Susan Baum's work, where we have blue and yellow make green. So blue are where kids struggle. Yellow are where they excel or are gifted. Together they make green. You have to see all of it in order to understand the child and support them. So I would argue gifted first, but it is part of the whole piece too. You've got to understand the situation, the person, in order to best help them. And I think a lot of times we just don't understand everything that's going on. So then we're not able to truly help them.
Right. Right. Well, I'm not going to argue with a strengths-based approach. I love that. Get totally on board with that. And it just, we come full circle, I think, with this idea that working with gifted and twice exceptional kids certainly is a separate area of competence for us and for many professionals that we need to really dive in and know about these kids if we're going to work with them.
Absolutely. And I will do a little plug for Sing.
Sure.
And your listeners. We are having our big Sing conference at Villanova this summer. It's outside of Philadelphia. So if anyone is interested, it is a family kind of conference. Bring your kids. We've got different STEM activities, young adults programs, and it's all for supporting, gifted and twice exceptional kids, that whole social emotional piece that is so important. So.
Very cool. Yeah. And as always, put these links in the show notes to books and the conference and any other resources that you would like to share. So folks can definitely check that out. But yeah, Adam, thank you. This was fun, informative, and got me thinking about a lot of different things. I appreciate your time.
It's my pleasure. Thank you.
All right, y'all. Thank you so much for tuning into this episode. Always grateful to have you here. I hope that you take away some information that you can implement in your practice and in your life. Any resources that we mentioned during the episode will be listed in the show notes, so make sure to check those out. If you like what you hear on the podcast, I would be so grateful if you left a review on iTunes or Spotify or wherever you listen to your podcasts. And if you're a practice owner or aspiring practice owner, I'd invite you to check out the Testing Psychologist Mastermind groups. I have mastermind groups at every stage of practice development: beginner, intermediate, and advanced. We have homework, we have accountability, we have support, we have resources. These groups are amazing. We do a lot of work and a lot of connecting. If that sounds interesting to you, you can check out the details at thetestingpsychologist.com/consulting. You can sign up for a pre-group phone call and we will chat and figure out if a group could be a good fit for you. Thanks so much. The information contained in this podcast and on the Testing Psychologist website are intended for informational and educational purposes only. Nothing in this podcast or on the website is intended to be a substitute for professional psychological, psychiatric, or medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment. Please note that no doctor-patient relationship is formed here, and similarly, no supervisory or consultative relationship is formed between the host or guests of this podcast and listeners of this podcast. If you need the qualified advice of any mental health practitioner or medical provider, please seek one in your area. Similarly, if you need supervision on clinical matters, please find a supervisor with an expertise that fits your needs.